In the vast expanse of the universe where countless species coexisted in a delicate balance of power and diplomacy, there existed a cardinal rule: never, ever, under any circumstances, take what belongs to a Deathworlder. It was a simple concept, really. One would think that even the dimmest of intergalactic civilizations could grasp it. But as with all rules, there's always that one idiot who thinks they're the exception. Enter the Zyx'zorians, a race of hyper-intelligent, gelatinous blobs with an unfortunate penchant for collecting quaint artifacts from lesser species. Now, you might wonder how a species composed primarily of goo managed to become a spacefaring civilization. The answer, dear reader, is simple: they cheated. But that's a story for another time. Our tale begins on a seemingly ordinary day aboard the Terran Space Station Inconvenience, named, of course, by the station's first commander, who had a rather dry sense of humor. The station orbited lazily around a nondescript planet in the Orion Arm, serving as a refueling depot and trade hub for various species traversing the galaxy. Commander Sarah, don't call me Sally Johnson, sat in her office, feet propped up on her desk, idly tossing a stress ball shaped like Earth from one hand to the other. She was bored. Bored out of her mind. The kind of boredom that makes watching paint dry seem like an extreme sport. Computer, she drawled, her voice dripping with sarcasm, please tell me there's a Klingon attack or a Borg invasion, or something to liven up this godforsaken day. The station's AI, affectionately named Dave, definitely almost very efficient, responded with an equally dry tone. I'm afraid not, Commander. However, I can simulate the sounds of potent torpedoes if that would improve your mood. Sarah snorted, a sound somewhere between a laugh and a grunt. Ah, Dave, your attempts at humor are almost as painful as this shift. Almost. Just as she was contemplating the merits of initiating a station-wide drill, just to watch her crew scramble around like caffeinated squirrels, the comm system crackled to life. Commander, it was Ensign Pete, the fresh-faced newbie who always sounded like he was one loud noise away from wetting himself. We've got a situation at Docking Bay 3. Sarah's eyes lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. Define situation, Ensign. And please, for the love of all that is holy in this universe, tell me it's not another Grixplex mating ritual gone wrong. I'm still finding tentacles in the ventilation shafts from last time. No, Mom, Pete replied, his voice quivering slightly. It's the Zyx'zorians. They've taken something. Sarah's feet hit the floor with a thud. Taken something? Like what? The last shred of my patience, because let me tell you, that ship sailed a long time ago. No, Commander, Pete gulped audibly. They've taken Mr. Whiskers. The silence that followed was so profound you could hear a pin drop, or, in this case, a stress ball hitting the floor and rolling away dramatically. Mr. Whiskers, Sarah repeated, her voice dangerously calm, as in the Mr. Whiskers. The station's cat, the furry little asshole who's managed to endear himself to every species that's passed through here, despite being a glorified rat with delusions of grandeur. Yes, Mom, Pete squeaked. Sarah stood up slowly, cracking her knuckles with an ominous pop. Well then, it seems the Zyx'zorians need a crash course in Deathworlder 101. Dave, sound the alarm. It's time to go get our cat. As the klaxons began to wail, Sarah strode out of her office, a predatory grin spreading across her face. The crew, hearing the alarm, burst into action, their training kicking in as they prepared for, well, they weren't quite sure what, but by God, they were going to be prepared for it. Sarah's voice boomed over the station-wide comms, a mixture of barely contained rage and twisted amusement. Attention, crew of the Inconvenience. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. Some gelatinous morons have made the grave mistake of catnapping Mr. Whiskers. As you all know, he may be a furry little hell spawn, but he's our furry little hell spawn. Prepare for retrieval operations. And may whatever deity the Zyx'zorians believe in have mercy on their souls, because I sure as hell won't. As the crew scrambled to their positions, murmurs of disbelief and outrage rippled through the station. Mr. Whiskers, despite being a cantankerous ball of fur with a penchant for shredding important documents and leaving presents in the most inconvenient places, was beloved by all. Even the non-human crew members, who had initially been baffled by the Terran obsession with keeping small predators as pets, had fallen under his spell. There was Zyx'zor, the Andorian security chief, who often complained about Mr. Whiskers shedding blue fur all over his pristine uniform, but was always seen sneaking the cat treats, and Dr. Z. Corks, the Vulcan chief medical officer, who claimed to find the cat's illogical behavior fascinating but was caught on more than one occasion engaging in what could only be described as a staring contest with the feline. As Sarah marched towards the command center, her second-in-command, a towering Orion named Tax, fell into step beside her. Commander, he rumbled, his green skin flushing a darker shade with excitement. The crew is ready. We've locked onto the Zyx'zorian ship. They're not moving. Sarah's eyebrow arched so high it threatened to escape her forehead entirely. Not moving. Well, isn't that considerate of them? It's almost like they want us to kick their gelatinous asses back to whatever primordial soup they crawled out of. Tax, still struggling with the finer points of human sarcasm, nodded seriously. Indeed. Perhaps they are awaiting diplomatic negotiations. The laugh that burst from Sarah's lips was sharp enough to cut diamonds. Oh, we'll negotiate all right, with extreme prejudice. As they entered the command center, a hush fell over the bustling room. All eyes turned to Sarah, awaiting her orders. She stepped up to the central console, her fingers dancing over the controls as she pulled up a view of the Zyx'zorian ship on the main screen. It was, well, calling it a ship would be generous. It looked more like someone had taken a lava lamp, pumped it full of steroids, and then decided it needed lasers. The gelatinous mass pulsed with an array of nauseating colors, dotted here and there with what appeared to be windows, or possibly eyes. With the Zyx'zorians, it was hard to tell. "All right, people," Sarah announced, her voice carrying the weight of command and the edge of a person who was about 2 seconds away from introducing an entire alien species to the concept of regret. "Here's the plan. We're going to hail these blob brains and give them one chance, one to return Mr. Whiskers unharmed. If they refuse, well," she cracked her knuckles again, a sound that seemed to echo ominously throughout the command center. "Let's just say they're going to learn why the term Deathworlder isn't just a cute nickname." "Aye, Commander," the crew chorused, a mix of anticipation and bloodlust gleaming in their eyes. Sarah nodded to the communications officer. "Open a channel. Let's see if these jelly brains can comprehend just how deeply they've stepped in it." The main screen flickered, and suddenly they were face to face or face to gelatinous mass with the Zyx'zorian captain. It was a sight that would haunt the dreams of anyone with even a passing interest in maintaining a solid form. The Zyx'zorian captain, a particularly large and violently purple blob, pulsed with what might have been surprise. It was hard to tell, given that its entire body was essentially one giant mood ring. "Greetings, Terran vessel," the captain burbled, its voice sounding like someone gargling mouthwash underwater. "To what do we owe the pleasure of this communication?" Sarah stepped forward, her eyes narrowing dangerously. "Cut the crap. Captain Jello, we know you've taken something that doesn't belong to you. Something furry, ornery, and prone to leaving hairballs in inconvenient places." The Zyx'zorian captain's form rippled in what might have been confusion or indigestion. "Again, hard to tell. I'm afraid I don't understand, Commander. We are merely peaceful collectors of galactic curiosities. We have taken nothing that wasn't freely given." A snort of disbelief echoed through the command center. Even Dave, the AI, managed to convey his skepticism through a series of disapproving beeps. Sarah's voice dropped to a dangerous purr. "Let me spell it out for you, Flubber. You've taken our cat, Mr. Whiskers. Ring any bells? Or do I need to come over there and ring them for you?" The Zyx'zorian captain's color shifted rapidly, cycling through a range of hues that would make a disco ball jealous. "Ah, the small furry creature. Yes, we found it most fascinating. Such an odd little predator kept as what do you call it? A pet. We simply had to add it to our collection of galactic oddities." The temperature in the command center seemed to drop several degrees as Sarah's expression hardened. Collection. Listen here, you overgrown lava lamp. Mr. Whiskers is not some trinket for your amusement. He is a valued member of this station's crew, a morale officer of the highest caliber, and the only being in this sector with the audacity to use my captain's chair as a scratching post. And more importantly, he's ours. The Zyx'zorian captain's form wobbled uncertainly, but we've already begun the integration process. The creature is being studied as we speak. Surely you understand the value of scientific inquiry. Sarah's smile was all teeth and no humor. "Oh, I understand scientific inquiry all right. In fact, I'm about to conduct an experiment of my own. It's called how quickly can a Zyx'zorian ship turn tail and run when faced with a pissed-off Deathworlder care to participate." The alien captain's color drained to a sickly greenish gray. Now, let's not be hasty. Perhaps we can come to some sort of arrangement. A trade, perhaps. Sarah leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow managed to carry across the vast distance of space. "Here's the deal. Jello shot you have exactly 5 minutes to return Mr. Whiskers, unharmed and preferably not covered in any of your secretions. If you comply, we'll let you go with nothing more than a stern warning and possibly a strongly worded letter to your government. If you don't, she let the threat hang in the air like a guillotine blade." The Zyx'zorian captain's form quivered visibly. "And if we refuse?" Sarah's grin was positively feral. "Well, then we get to find out if your species can experience regret." "Tick-tock, Captain. The clock's ticking, and I'm not known for my patience." As the communication channel closed, leaving the Zyx'zorian captain in what was undoubtedly a state of gelatinous panic, Sarah turned to her crew. The look in her eyes was a mixture of manic glee and cold fury that sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened officers. "All right, people," she announced, clapping her hands together with an enthusiasm usually reserved for demolition experts about to push the big red button. "Let's prepare for all contingencies. I want options, and I want them creative. Remember, we're dealing with beings who thought it was a good idea to steal a cat from a station full of Deathworlders. Clearly, we're not dealing with the sharpest tools in the galactic shed." The crew burst into action. A chaotic symphony of beeping consoles, rapid-fire suggestions, and the occasional muffled curse as someone stubbed their toe in their haste. It was beautiful. in a twisted, potentially about to commit an intergalactic incident kind of way. Tax, ever the voice of reason, or at least the closest approximation thereof, cleared his throat. Commander, perhaps we should consider a diplomatic approach. The Galactic Council might not look kindly on us vaporizing a Zyx'zorian ship over a cat. Sarah fixed him with a look that could have curdled milk in a different star system. Tax, my dear, sweet, naive friend. This stopped being about diplomacy the moment they laid their gelatinous appendages on Mr. Whiskers. Besides, she added with a wink that was somehow more terrifying than her glare, who said anything about vaporizing. I'm thinking more along the lines of creative persuasion. Meanwhile, aboard the Zyx'zorian ship, chaos reigned supreme, which, given that the entire crew was essentially a collection of sentient Jell-O molds, was a sight to behold. Captain Zlurp, a name that sounded suspiciously like someone stepping in something, was frantically pulsating orders to his crew. Quickly, find the furry creature, and someone figure out how to operate the propulsion systems. Why did we think it was a good idea to base our technology on gelatinous undulation? In the ship's makeshift laboratory, a team of Zyx'zorian scientists were attempting to study Mr. Whiskers, the key word here being attempting, for you see, while the Zyx'zorians had advanced technology and the ability to traverse the stars, they had somehow overlooked one crucial detail in their grand plan to collect a Terran pet. Cats, as a rule, do not like being studied, especially not by quivering masses of goo. Mr. Whiskers, a magnificent tabby with a stripe of white down his nose that looked suspiciously like a middle finger to the universe, was currently engaged in what could only be described as psychological warfare against his captors. He sat, tail curled neatly around his paws, in the center of the examination table. His green eyes, filled with the kind of disdain usually reserved for politicians and people who talk during movies, were fixed unblinkingly on the lead scientist. Dr. Bloop again. Zyx'zorian names left much to be desired, was beginning to question his career choices. Every time he extended a gelatinous tendril towards Mr. Whiskers, the cat would emit a low growl that somehow managed to convey threats of violence in at least 17 different languages. Fascinating, Dr. Bloop burbled, his form rippling with a mixture of fear and scientific curiosity. The creature appears to be employing some form of sonic-based deterrent, perhaps a defense mechanism. His assistant, a smaller blob of a sickly yellow hue, wobbled nervously. Ah, Doctor, I don't think that's a defense mechanism. I think it's plotting our demise. Dr. Bloop scoffed, an action that caused his entire body to jiggle alarmingly. Don't be ridiculous. It's a simple creature from a death world. How dangerous could it possibly be? As if in answer to his question, Mr. Whiskers chose that moment to demonstrate exactly why you don't mess with a creature that had evolved on a planet where everything, including some of the plants, wanted to kill you. With a yowl that would have made a banshee cover its ears, Mr. Whiskers launched himself at Dr. Bloop. What followed was a scene of such chaotic violence that it defied description. Suffice it to say, it involved a lot of hissing, scratching, and the sound of gelatinous bodies splatting against various surfaces. By the time the dust settled, Mr. Whiskers was calmly grooming himself atop a console, surrounded by the quivering, traumatized remains of the Zyx'zorian science team. Dr. Bloop, or what was left of him, was spread in a thin layer across most of the laboratory floor, occasionally emitting pitiful bubbling noises. The ship's intercom crackled to life, Captain Zlurp's voice wavering with panic. Dr. Bloop, what's happening down there? We're running out of time. Mr. Whiskers, demonstrating an understanding of dramatic timing that would make Shakespeare weep with envy, chose that exact moment to emit a single, smug meow into the intercom. Back on the Inconvenience, the command center had transformed into a hive of barely controlled chaos. Ideas were being thrown around with the reckless abandon of a toddler in a candy store, each more outlandish than the last. We could release a swarm of nanobots programmed to tickle them into submission, suggested Ensign Pete, his eyes wild with a mix of caffeine and terror. How about we beam over wearing gel-proof suits and threaten to introduce them to the concept of evaporation, countered Lieutenant Rodriguez, pantomiming what could only be described as a deranged rain dance. Sarah, for her part, was pacing back and forth, occasionally pausing to glare at the viewscreen as if she could intimidate the Zyx'zorian ship into compliance through sheer force of will. Given the legendary stubbornness of Terran commanders, it wasn't entirely out of the realm of possibility. Commander Dave's voice cut through the cacophony, somehow managing to sound both bored and slightly amused. I've been analyzing the Zyx'zorian ship structure, and I believe I've found a weakness we could exploit. Sarah's head snapped up, a grin spreading across her face that would have sent lesser beings running for the hills. Do tell Dave. And please, spare no gruesome details. Well, Dave continued, his tone suggesting that if he had eyes, he'd be rolling them. It appears their hull is particularly susceptible to rapid temperature changes. A targeted burst from our thermal regulators could, theoretically, cause localized solidification. The command center fell silent as everyone processed this information. Then, slowly, like a predator that's just spotted particularly stupid prey, Sarah's grin widened. Are you telling me, she said, her voice dripping with malicious glee, that we could essentially turn sections of their ship into the galaxy's largest jello mold? Affirmative, Commander Dave replied, though I feel compelled to point out that comparing their biological structure to a Terran dessert might be considered insensitive. Sarah waved her hand dismissively. Dave, honey, they kidnapped our cat. I think we're well past the point of cultural sensitivity. Now, let's give our gelatinous friends a call and see if they're ready to jiggle to our tune. As the communication channel opened once again, the crew of the Inconvenience was treated to a sight that would haunt their dreams for years to come. The Zyx'zorian bridge was in a state of complete disarray. Blobs of various colors were wobbling about in what appeared to be blind panic, occasionally colliding with each other and merging briefly before separating with looks of embarrassment, or at least as close to embarrassment as a being made entirely of goo can manage. Captain Zlurp, now a sickly shade of green, quivered into view. "See, Commander Johnson," he burbled, his voice sounding like a drowning man trying to gargle mouthwash. We seem to have encountered some difficulties with your pet." Sarah's eyebrow arched so high it threatened to achieve orbit. "Oh, do tell, Captain Flubber. I'm all ears. And unlike you, I mean that figuratively." The Zyx'zorian captain's form rippled in what might have been a gulp. "The creature, it's not exactly cooperating with our research efforts." A snort of laughter echoed through the Inconvenience's command center. Sarah didn't bother to identify the culprit. Secretly, she was rather proud of her crew's appreciation for cosmic irony. "Not cooperating," Sarah repeated, her voice a masterpiece of faux concern. "You don't say. It's almost as if kidnapping a creature evolved to hunt and kill things might have been a bad idea. Who could have possibly foreseen such an outcome? Oh, wait. Literally everyone except you gelatinous geniuses." Captain Zerp's color shifted rapidly, cycling through a range of hues that would have given a chameleon an identity crisis. "Commander, please. We meant no harm. We are scientists, explorers. We merely wish to study your fascinating life forms." Sarah's smile was all teeth and no humor. "Well, congratulations, Captain. You're getting one hell of a case study in Terran biology, specifically the part where we don't take kindly to our fuzzy friends being abducted. Now, I'm going to make this very simple, so even your protein-deficient excuse for a brain can understand it." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "You have exactly 2 minutes to return Mr. Whiskers to us, unharmed and preferably not covered in any of your secretions. If you comply, we'll let you go with nothing more than a stern warning and possibly a strongly worded letter to your government. If you don't," she let the threat hang in the air like a guillotine blade. "And if we can't comply," Captain Zlurp quivered, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's grin widened to truly alarming proportions. "Well, then we get to test out a fascinating little theory our AI came up with. Tell me, Captain, how do you feel about becoming a popsicle?" The look of confusion on Captain Zlurp's face, or what passed for a face in his species, was almost comical. "A popsicle? I'm not familiar with this term." "Oh, it's a delightful Terran treat," Sarah explained, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "You take something liquid, or in your case, gelatinous, and you freeze it solid. Usually we do this with fruit juice, but I'm sure your biological structure will work just fine. Shall we find out?" The color drained from Captain Zlurp's form so quickly it was as if someone had hit a reset button. He was now a pale, quivering mass that bore a striking resemblance to a bowl of particularly unappetizing tapioca pudding. "And now, let's not be hasty," he bubbled, his voice rising in pitch with each word. "I'm sure we can come to some sort of agreement. There's no need for freezing anyone." Sarah leaned back in her chair, the picture of relaxed menace. "The clock's ticking. Captain Jello, tick-tock, tick-tock. Better hurry, or you'll be the galaxy's first Zyx'zorian sickle." As the communication channel closed, leaving the Zyx'zorian captain in what was undoubtedly a state of gelatinous panic, Sarah turned to her crew. The look in her eyes was a mixture of manic glee and cold fury that sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened officers. "All right, people," she announced, clapping her hands together with an enthusiasm usually reserved for demolition experts about to push the big red button. "Let's prepare for all contingencies. I want our thermal regulators ready to go at a moment's notice. If these blob brains don't return Mr. Whiskers in the next 2 minutes, we're going to introduce them to the concept of brain freeze. Assuming they have brains, that is." The crew burst into action. A whirlwind of efficiency born from equal parts military training and the universal desire to see justice served to those who would dare lay a gelatinous tendril on their beloved ship's cat. Meanwhile, aboard the Zyx'zorian vessel, panic had given way to utter chaos. Captain Zlurp was barking, or rather, bubbling orders in all directions, his form rippling and distorting with each frantic command. "Find that furry menace," he gurgled, sloshing back and forth across the bridge. "And someone figure out how to operate our propulsion systems. Why did we think basing our technology on gelatinous undulation was a good idea?" In the ship's laboratory, or what was left of it after Mr. Whiskers' reign of terror, the science team was engaged in a desperate game of cat and, well, not mouse. More like cat and sentient pudding. Mr. Whiskers, for his part, seemed to be thoroughly enjoying himself. He had discovered that the Zyx'zorians made delightful splashing noises when pounced upon, and he was taking full advantage of this newfound knowledge. The lab had become a feline amusement park complete with quivering, terrified rides that scattered at his approach. Dr. Bloop, or what remained of him after his earlier encounter with Mr. Whiskers' claws, had managed to pull himself together, literally. He was now huddled in a corner, oscillating between a sickly green and a pale, terrified white. The horror, he bubbled weakly to his assistant. The horror. Did you see its teeth? Its claws? How can something so small be so terrifying? His assistant supplied helpfully, ducking as Mr. Whiskers sailed overhead, batting playfully at a piece of equipment that was now functioning as an impromptu. Magnificent, Dr. Bloop finished, his tone a mixture of fear and awe. We've made a terrible mistake, haven't we? Before his assistant could respond, the ship's intercom crackled to life. Captain Zlurp's voice, now several octaves higher than normal, filled the room. Attention all crew. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. We are initiating emergency protocol. Return the furball and run away very fast. All personnel are to converge on the main cargo bay immediately. And someone please bring what did the Terrans call it? A cat carrier? On second thought, bring several. And padding. Lots of padding. As the Zyx'zorians scrambled to comply with their captain's orders, Mr. Whiskers sat calmly in the center of the chaos, grooming himself with the air of a king surveying his conquered domain. He paused briefly, green eyes narrowing as he observed the panicked aliens around him. If cats could smirk, Mr. Whiskers would have been wearing a grin wide enough to make the Cheshire Cat jealous. Back on the Inconvenience, the atmosphere was tense. The 2-minute deadline was rapidly approaching, and there had been no word from the Zyx'zorian vessel. Sarah stood at the center of the command deck, her posture rigid, eyes fixed on the view screen with laser-like intensity. 30 seconds, Commander Dave announced, his tone suggesting that he was rather looking forward to what might happen next. Sarah nodded, her fingers drumming an ominous rhythm on the armrest of her chair. Thermal regulators, primed and ready, Commander Lieutenant Rodriguez reported, a hint of eagerness in his voice. Just say the word, and we'll turn that ship into the galaxy's biggest ice cube tray. Excellent, Sarah purred, her grin taking on a predatory edge. Let's see if our gelatinous friends have developed some common sense in the last 2 minutes, shall we? Open a channel. The view screen flickered to life, revealing the Zyx'zorian bridge, or rather, what was left of it. The scene that greeted the crew of the Inconvenience was one of such utter chaos that for a moment, they could only stare in stunned silence. Captain Zlurp was in the center of the frame, his gelatinous form quivering so violently he resembled nothing so much as a sentient bowl of jelly in an earthquake. Around him, his crew was engaged in what appeared to be a slapstick routine gone horribly wrong. Zyx'zorians were sliding, slipping, and in some cases splatting across every surface, leaving trails of goo in their wake. And there, in the midst of it all, sitting atop what might have been a control console, it was hard to tell, given the layer of slime covering everything, was Mr. Whiskers. The cat looked, if possible, even more smug than usual, his tail curled neatly around his paws as he surveyed the pandemonium with regal disdain. Sarah blinked, momentarily thrown off her rhythm by the sheer absurdity of the scene. Then, slowly, a grin spread across her face that would have sent lesser beings running for the nearest black hole. Well, she drawled, leaning back in her chair with the air of a cat that had not only gotten the cream but had managed to frame the dog for its disappearance. Looks like someone's been having fun. Captain Zlurp's eyes, or what passed for eyes in his species, swiveled wildly, finally focusing on the view screen. Commander Johnson, he burbled, his voice a mixture of relief and terror. Please, you must help us. Your creature, it's magnificent, terrifying, the harbinger of your gelatinous doom, Sarah supplied helpfully, her tone suggesting she was enjoying this far more than was probably appropriate for a Starfleet officer. I believe the word you're looking for is Terran Captain. Mr. Whiskers is simply demonstrating why it's a monumentally bad idea to kidnap anything from a death world. The Zyx'zorian captain's form rippled in what might have been a full-body cringe. We didn't know. How were we to understand that such a small, furry creature could be so bad? As Sarah finished for him, her grin widening. Oh, Captain, you have so much to learn about the universe. Lesson number 1. Size doesn't matter when you've evolved on a planet where everything, including some of the plants, wants to kill you. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous purr. Now, I believe our little deadline has expired, so here's what's going to happen. You're going to very carefully place Mr. Whiskers in a carrier, and for the love of all that's holy, make sure it's escape-proof, and transport him back to us. Then, you're going to turn your little goo mobile around and slither back to whatever corner of the galaxy you came from. And if I ever hear about you or any of your slimy friends so much as looking at another Terran pet funny, well, she paused, letting the threat hang in the air like a guillotine blade. Let's just say that becoming a popsicle will be the least of your worries. Are we clear? Captain Zlurp's entire form seemed to deflate, oozing slightly onto the floor in abject surrender. Crystal clear, Commander. We'll return your Mr. Whiskers immediately. And you have my word, we will never again attempt to study Terran life forms without express permission." Sarah's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Smart move, Captain Jello. You might just survive this encounter after all. Now hop to it." Mr. Whiskers' dinner time is approaching, and he gets ever so cranky when his schedule is disrupted. As the view screen went dark, Sarah turned to her crew, all of whom were wearing expressions that ranged from awe to barely suppressed laughter. "Well, folks," she announced, clapping her hands together, "I'd say this has been a productive day. We've defended the honor of our station, taught a valuable lesson in interspecies relations, and hopefully scared the living daylights out of an entire race of overgrown jello moles. Not bad for a Thursday." Tax, ever the voice of reason, cleared his throat. "Commander, don't you think we should report this incident to Starfleet Command? There are protocols for first contact situations, even if they did kidnap Mr. Whiskers." Sarah waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, we'll file a report. Tax, a very detailed, very boring report about a routine cultural exchange that ended in a peaceful resolution and mutual understanding. No need to bother the brass with tales of feline heroism and gelatinous terror, right?" The grin she flashed him was positively wicked. "Besides, can you imagine trying to explain to Admiral Stick Up His Ass how we almost started an intergalactic incident over a cat? He'd have us all transferred to an outpost so remote, it would make this station look like a galactic hub." Before Tax could form a response, the transporter room signaled the bridge. "Commander," came the slightly bewildered voice of the transporter chief. "We've received Mr. Whiskers. You might want to come down here and see this for yourself." Sarah's eyebrow arched with interest. Well. Looks like our feline friend has made quite an impression." "Tax, you have the bridge. I'm going to go welcome our conquering hero home." As Sarah strode into the transporter room, she was greeted by a sight that would be forever etched in her memory. There, in the center of the transporter pad, sat Mr. Whiskers, looking for all the world like the cat, who'd not only eaten the canary but had also negotiated a favorable trade deal with its entire species. But it wasn't Mr. Whiskers himself that caused Sarah to stop short, her jaw dropping in a most uncommanderly fashion. It was what surrounded him. The cat was perched regally atop what appeared to be a makeshift throne, cobbled together from various bits of Zyx'zorian technology. Pieces of gelatinous material clung to the construct, giving it an otherworldly, slightly pulsating appearance. Around the throne, arranged in a neat semicircle, were no less than a dozen containers of various sizes and shapes, each filled with what looked suspiciously like. "Are those treats?" Sarah asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and growing amusement. The transporter chief nodded, a look of utter bewilderment on his face. "Yes, ma'am. Near as we can tell, there's some kind of Zyx'zorian delicacy. Apparently, Mr. Whiskers developed quite a taste for them during his stay." Sarah approached the transporter pad slowly, eyeing Mr. Whiskers with a newfound respect. The cat met her gaze evenly, then deliberately raised a paw and began to groom it, the very picture of nonchalance. "You know," Sarah mused, reaching out to scratch behind Mr. Whiskers' ears, "I think we might have been approaching this whole first contact thing all wrong. Forget the diplomats and the cultural attaches. We should just send cats." Mr. Whiskers purred in agreement, then turned his attention to one of the containers, batting at it playfully. "Oh no, you don't," Sarah chuckled, scooping up the cat and his newfound treasure. "I think you've had enough adventure for one day. Besides, we need to have a little chat about the proper protocol for being kidnapped by aliens. Hint, it doesn't usually involve subjugating the entire species." As she carried Mr. Whiskers back to her quarters, Sarah couldn't help but shake her head in amazement. "You know, furball," she murmured, "I have a feeling the Zyx'zorians aren't going to forget this encounter anytime soon. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if Whiskers becomes a curse word in their language." Mr. Whiskers, for his part, simply purred contentedly, already eyeing his next container of alien treats. Back on the bridge, Tax was overseeing the departure of the Zyx'zorian vessel when DA's voice cut through the quiet hum of activity. "Commander Thax," the AI intoned, a note of what might have been amusement in his synthetic voice. "I'm picking up some rather interesting transmissions from the Zyx'zorian ship. It seems they're composing some sort of ballad." Tax's antennae twitched with curiosity. "A ballad? What about?" There was a pause, as if Dave was processing the information or possibly trying to contain his laughter. "It appears to be an epic poem about the terrors of Terran fauna. The working title translates roughly to The Whiskers of Doom, a cautionary tale for gelatinous explorers." A ripple of barely suppressed laughter ran through the bridge crew. Tax, struggling to maintain his composure, cleared his throat. "Well," he said, his voice straining with the effort of not chuckling, "I suppose that's one way to ensure the lesson sticks. Make a note in the log, Dave. It seems our Mr. Whiskers has become something of a diplomatic incident after all." As the Zyx'zorian ship disappeared into the depths of space, no doubt traumatized but significantly wiser, life aboard the Inconvenience began to return to normal. Well, as normal as life ever got on a space station commanded by Sarah Johnson and guarded by a cat with a newfound taste for alien delicacies. In her quarters, Sarah sat at her desk, Mr. Whiskers curled up contentedly in her lap. working on her official report of the incident. She paused, fingers hovering over the keyboard, and looked down at the purring ball of fur. "You know," she mused, scratching under his chin, "I have a feeling this isn't going to be the last time you cause an intergalactic incident. Maybe we should start a tally. What do you think? One down, entire galaxy to go." Mr. Whiskers opened one eye, gave her a look that could only be described as smug agreement, then went back to his nap. Sarah chuckled, turning back to her report. As she typed, she couldn't help but grin. Life as a Deathworlder in a galaxy full of surprises was never dull, especially not with a ship's cat who had apparently appointed himself the station's chief of interspecies terror. Note to self, she muttered as she finished her report. Requisition more cat toys, preferably ones that don't look like potential alien life forms. Wouldn't want to give you any ideas. Mr. Whiskers' purr deepened, as if accepting the challenge. And so, as the Inconvenience continued its eternal orbit, its crew went about their duties, secure in the knowledge that they were protected not just by shields and weapons, but by a small, furry guardian with a penchant for causing chaos and a newfound taste for gelatinous treats. In the vast expanse of the galaxy, word began to spread in hushed whispers and fearful bubbles. Beware the Deathworlders, the stories said, but above all, beware their pets. For in the depths of space, where terrors lurk in the darkness between stars, sometimes the most fearsome creature of all is the one that purrs.